Crash! That sound could wake the dead. It wasn't the sharp pop of fireworks or the hollow thump of a trash can tipping over. No, this was uglier. Wood snapping, splintering, wrenching out of place, followed by the unmistakable growl of an engine and the hiss of brakes. I shot straight up in bed, my heart pounding like someone had slammed a hammer on my chest. By the time I scrambled outside in my pajamas, half my fence lay toppled across my yard, broken into jagged toothpicks. My lawn looked like it had been carved in two by parallel stripes of tire tracks, dark gouges pressed deep into the soil. I squinted into the darkness but saw no car, no headlights, no driver standing guilty in the street. Just silence. The streetlight buzzed overhead and the night seemed to laugh at me. At first I figured it had to be some drunk cutting through, misjudging the corner. Accidents happened, right? My blood still boiled, but I was willing to give fate the benefit of the doubt. That was until the morning. As the sun rose, I dragged myself outside to assess the damage, dreading the cost of repairs. The boards were split in odd angles, almost like something massive had rammed them head-on. There was no mistaking it. Someone hadn't just brushed my fence, they'd plowed through it like it was tissue paper. That's when I heard the voice. You know, if you didn't build fences so close to the curb, maybe people wouldn't keep hitting them. I turned slowly, already recognizing the smug tone before I saw her face. Joyce. Or as everyone in the neighborhood called her, HOA Karen. There she stood, arms crossed tight across her chest, a faint smirk tugging at her lips, her perfectly manicured nails glinting in the sun. She wasn't even trying to hide the sweet satisfaction in her voice. "Excuse me?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She gestured lazily toward the wreckage. "I mean, this is practically an accident waiting to happen. Poor design choices, and you'll want to get that fixed before the HOA notices. Broken fences make the whole neighborhood look trashy." That last word hit me like an insult to the face. Trashy. This from the woman who once sent out an official HOA memo dictating the exact shade of beige homeowners could paint their shutters. A woman who proudly handed out violation slips for holiday lights displayed past January 2nd. I could feel my jaw clenching. "Looks to me like someone didn't just brush the fence," I shot back. "Looks like someone drove straight into it." Joyce didn't flinch, not even a blink. But when my eyes slid over toward her driveway, I noticed something she clearly hadn't bothered to hide. Her shiny SUV, parked directly in front of her house. Fresh dent on the passenger side bumper, paint scraped off in uneven streaks that matched the splintered wood now lying all over my yard. I looked back at her, raising my eyebrows. She just shrugged. "Could have been anybody." Then she flashed a smile like this was all somehow my problem to deal with. My blood ran hot. Everybody in the cul-de-sac already knew what Joyce was like. She was the queen of control, the one who turned every HOA meeting into a tirade about community standards. But smashing through my property and smirking about it? That was new turf. A line crossed I wasn't prepared to forgive. Still, I swallowed my anger that morning, rebuilt the fence as best I could, tried to convince myself maybe it was a one-time deal. Maybe even the mighty HOA Karen would feel some shame when she looked at that dent in her vehicle. But deep down, I knew better. Because Joyce wasn't the type to feel shame. She was the type to feel entitled. And if she'd gotten away with it once, what was stopping her from trying again? As I hammered the last plank in place, I caught sight of her sipping coffee on her porch, watching me like I was a free show. She didn't wave, didn't apologize, just smirked again before retreating into her house with that air of victory about her. That was the moment I understood. I wasn't dealing with an accident. I was dealing with a pattern, with spite, with someone who thought she owned this street just because she sat in the HOA chair. The fence might have been broken, sure, but something else had just snapped too. And it wasn't wood this time. It was my patience. Everyone in our little cul-de-sac knew Joyce. HOA Karen, the self-appointed queen of neighborhood rules and petty policing. But what most didn't realize was just how deep her vendetta against me went. It started months before the first fence crash, when I painted my shutters navy blue. A bold choice, I thought, a little personality splash in a sea of tan and beige. But apparently, that was an act of rebellion in HOA land. Joyce stopped by the next day with her clipboard, eyes narrowed. "That color isn't on the approved palette. You'll need to repaint or face a formal citation." I tried to reason with her. "It's just shutters, and they look nice." "Rules are rules," she snapped back. "Consistency is what keeps property values up." The rule book she carried was thick and dense, filled with all kinds of regulations: acceptable grass height, permitted outdoor decorations, trash bin placement schedules, light fixture styles. The list went on. Joyce knew it inside and out, every letter, every clause. She took it as her mission to enforce every single one, sometimes with little mercy. Mrs. Dillard, who lived 2 houses down, was another favorite target. One year, Joyce slapped a warning on her door because her Halloween decorations stayed up 2 extra days into November, the absolute height of the violation in her eyes. Poor Mrs. Dillard had to haul everything back inside, muttering under her breath. Then there was Thomas, the single dad on Elm Street. He forgot to put his trash cans away one morning, and sure enough, Joyce left a postpartum-style note warning of a fine if it happened again. Thomas tried explaining it was due to work schedules, but Joyce wasn't having it. Among neighbors, she was notorious. Where some saw community, she saw control. Where some sought relaxation, she sought enforcement badges. I found myself in her crosshairs the minute I moved in. More than once, I got notes on my lawn care, letters demanding corrections on garden layouts, and once a formal request to trim a bush that apparently blocked line of sight for maintaining neighborhood aesthetics. Every little thing I did was watched and criticized like I was under a microscope, so when the fence got hit the first time, my first suspicion was, well, Joyce. But I hoped foolishly it was a coincidence. People do hit things by accident. Till it happened again. 2 weeks after that midnight crash, I woke to the sound of screeching tires on wet pavement and wood splintering louder than thunder. My heart sank. Rushing outside, there it was. Fresh tire tracks across the lawn. The same fence segment destroyed again, worse than before. And this time, Joyce didn't even bother hiding. She was leaning out of her driver's side window, chewing gum and looking as if the whole thing was an inconvenience, like I'd randomly caught her on a bad day. "Well," she said, blowing a bubble and popping it, "maybe build it better next time." That was her parting shot before she peeled away with a roar, tires spinning on my grass, leaving behind a trail of destruction, and a whole neighborhood buzzing with talk. Neighbors whispered on lawns and over picket fences. Some shook their heads in frustration. "She's crossing the line," Mrs. Patel said quietly. "No one should get away with this." Others, though, feared her wrath. Joyce had a way of making even innocent chat feel risky. You never knew when a call to the HOA might slap you with a fine or a letter threatening violations if you said the wrong thing. But the rumor mill ground louder than ever that day. Mr. Thompson, the retired lawyer at the end of the street, shook his head as he sipped his morning coffee. "If I wanted a dictator, I'd have moved somewhere else," he muttered grimly. "This is just petty tyranny." I stood on my porch, looking at the wrecked fence for the second time in a month, feeling smaller than ever. But the storm inside me was growing. I realized this wasn't just about a fence anymore. It was about power, control, and one woman's obsession with domination in a neighborhood that should have felt like home. My frustration quickly turned to resolve. If Joyce thought she could bully me with fence crashes and HOA threats, she was in for a surprise, because I wasn't going to back down. Not anymore. After the second time Joyce, HOA Karen, had crashed her SUV through my fence like it was her personal off-road playground, I wasn't just angry anymore. I was done letting this woman bulldoze me and my property. But how do you fight someone with the iron fist of HOA rules and a silver tongue sharp enough to slice through steel? The answer wasn't shouting or legal battles. Those would drag on forever, and I wasn't made of patience. No, I had to get creative, and a little bit sneaky. The week after the second crash, I started quietly gathering supplies. Late one evening, I slipped out and made a beeline for the hardware store near town. Nobody knew what I was up to, not even my closest friends. I browsed the aisles like a secret agent on a mission, picking out the strongest steel posts I could find, bags of quick-setting concrete, thick bolts, and heavy-duty brackets. Then I stocked up on power tools, drill bits, and industrial screws. The cashier even gave me an odd look, but I just smiled and said, "It's a home improvement project." Back home, I locked myself in the garage, unboxing my haul under the harsh light of a single bulb. For days, I sketched out plans and made measurements, trying to design something that looked ordinary but could withstand whatever Joyce decided to throw or drive at it next. I didn't want a fortress, just a trap that would teach her a lesson. Underneath the shabby wooden panels of the fence section Joyce loved to target, I reconstructed a hidden steel framework anchored deep into the ground with concrete. From the street, the fence looked no different. Same splintered boards, same picket style, but beneath the surface was a steel skeleton ready to bite back. I worked mostly at night, careful to keep noise down so Joyce wouldn't catch on. I even joked with my neighbor across the street when she asked what I was up to. "Just patching up the fence again," I said with a smile. "You know how HOA requirements go. Can't have broken fences lying around." She nodded but didn't press. The feeling of anticipation grew every day. I could almost imagine Joyce's smug face when she slammed into my weak fence for the third time, only to find it wasn't going to budge. I wasn't the kind of person eager to exact revenge, but this was different. This was about making a point and protecting my home. As the trap neared completion, I doubled the stakes. I rigged a few noisy boards to creak loudly when impacted, ensuring my ears would be on alert when Joyce decided to make her move. Then, I waited and waited. The neighborhood was quiet for almost 2 weeks. Maybe Joyce was scared off. Maybe she was nursing that dent in her poor SUV and reconsidering. Maybe, but then it happened. At just past midnight, I was jolted awake by the unmistakable crunch of wood giving way, followed by the screech of metal grinding against metal and the shatter of glass. I threw off the sheets and bolted outside. The street was illuminated by headlights. Joyce's SUV was wedged smack into my fence, the front end crushed like a soda can. The airbags had deployed, hanging like white balloons inside the cab. For a moment, no one moved. Then I saw her door swing open, and there was Joyce. Frozen, shock splattered all over her face. The colliding sounds of creaking steel and splintering wood confirmed it. The trap had worked exactly as planned. The steel frame beneath the fence had stopped her cold. Her car was wrecked, and my fence remained standing, barely scratched. The air smelled like burnt rubber and crushed metal mixed with the fresh sap of my fence posts. I stood there, catching my breath, adrenaline flooding my veins. This was no longer about property damage or petty fights. This was justice. This expanded chapter builds suspense methodically, showing the narrator Six's cleverness and patience in setting the trap and the satisfying payoff when Karen finally meets the consequences of her reckless behavior. Joyce sat on the curb, her hands trembling as she stared at the wreckage of her once glorious SUV. Her eyes were wide, her usual poise shattered along with the front grille of her vehicle. I stood a few feet away, trying to keep my breathing steady, part adrenaline, part satisfaction, part dread. This was going to blow up in a way neither of us expected. "You set that up, didn't you?" she spat, pointing a shaky finger at the fence. "You built that to wreck my car. It's reckless, malicious." I just shook my head. "You mean my fence? The one you keep driving through?" "Yeah. I made sure it could actually stand when you tried again." Slowly, neighbors started pouring out of their houses. Phones appeared in hands, cameras flashing. Whispered conversations replaced the night's silence. People who'd been silent under Joyce's rule were finally speaking up. Mr. Patel, our usually mild-mannered neighbor, crossed the street, shaking his head. "Joyce, you've been hitting that fence for weeks. No one's buying your accident story anymore." Mrs. Dillard ambled over, clutching her knitting bag. "Maybe now you'll think twice before terrorizing the rest of us with your rules." A few others nodded, some muttering about time she got what was coming. But Joyce wasn't finished. "This is a setup. You can't do this. I'm going to call the HOA and I'll see you in court." Her voice cracked and the confident mask slipped, revealing pure panic underneath. At that moment, the sheriff's cruiser rolled up, lights dimmed but eyes alert. The officer took in the scene quickly. The tire tracks across my lawn, the wrecked SUV pressed against the fence, neighbors whispering eagerly, and pulled Joyce aside. She tried her usual spin, blaming unsafe structures and deliberate sabotage. But the officer wasn't buying it. When he inspected the fence's steel supports anchored in concrete, he raised an eyebrow. "Ma'am, this looks like a crash caused by reckless driving," he said flatly. "You have a history of hitting this fence, and witnesses saw you speeding on this street multiple times. You're lucky nobody was behind that fence when you hit it." Joyce paled, muttering something about insurance, but the officer's tone was non-negotiable. The crowd murmured approval. Some cheered quietly. The once-feared HOA queen was crumbling. I felt a mix of relief and vindication. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about standing up to a bully, reclaiming peace in the neighborhood. For the first time in months, I walked back inside, knowing this battle might finally be over. The days after Joyce's crash were filled with whispers, sideways glances, and a quiet but powerful shift in our neighborhood's air. The once untouchable HOA queen was now the talk of the street, but not in her favor. The HOA board, Joyce's precious kingdom, held an emergency meeting within the week. I received a terse letter inviting me to attend, oddly worded but clearly acknowledging the chaos. Neighbors who had long suffered in silence were finally stepping forward, emboldened by what they'd witnessed. Joyce tried to present herself as the victim, a caretaker of community standards who'd been unfairly attacked. But her protests fell on deaf ears. Board members who once deferred nervously now questioned her harsh tactics and reckless behavior, and voices of dissent grew louder than the polite nods of the past. In fact, the board quietly decided Joyce had become a liability, a risk for the neighborhood's reputation and harmony. Rumors spread that she voluntarily stepped down after pressure mounted, though many suspected she was pushed out. Either way, the woman who controlled our every move had lost her throne. Meanwhile, the dent in her SUV sat proudly in her driveway, a permanent, visible reminder of the day her arrogance literally crashed. For weeks, it was the subject of countless neighborhood jokes and knowing smirks. Not even Joyce's tightly wound pride could repair that dent. The best part? Joyce started avoiding me. If I was outside, she power-walked the opposite way, head down, pretending not to see me or the other neighbors who'd rallied behind justice. She stopped sending those passive-aggressive HOA notices, stopped scrutinizing my lawn and shutters. The iron grip she held on our community had loosened at last. Neighbors came over more often, chatting casually without fear of being reported. The late-night HOA meetings were less about policing and more about community plans and holiday potlucks. It seemed like the neighborhood was breathing easier. One afternoon, Mrs. Dillard came knocking, holding a freshly baked pie with a wink. "Thanks for standing up for all of us," she said softly. "It was about time someone taught Karen a lesson." That night, I stood on my porch and looked over my yard one last time. The fence was repaired, the steel supports hidden once again beneath the neat wood planks. But the real strength was in what the fence represented now. More than just a barrier, it was a symbol that even the strongest bullies could be stopped. There's a lesson in all of this. Sometimes in a world obsessed with appearances and rules, The best way to win isn't to scream louder or dig deeper into conflict. Sometimes you've got to be patient, clever, and let karma do the heavy lifting. Joyce thought she could walk all over the neighborhood, drive through fences, and intimidate anyone who dared disagree. But in the end, it was her own recklessness that wrecked her, literally and figuratively. And sometimes, that's all the justice a person really needs.